Hey everybody, welcome back to another video in my 3.1 firmware update series, and this time I'm going to expand on what I did yesterday, which was redo my template for the Line 6 Helix to kind of tweak it to some of the new features that we have in 3.1. Well, after many requests, and I was planning to do this anyways, I'm going to do a video today where I'm going to make the same changes to my HX Stomp template to add in those same features from 3.1, but with a couple little tweaks just to kind of maybe free up some more blocks. So without further ado, let's go over to HX Edit and take a look. So actually what I did is I took my template from 3.1 on the Helix and I just imported it as such. And since we can transfer presets from the Stomp to the Helix or vice versa, as long as they fit within the confines of the limitations of the Stomp, we will have a successful import, and we did here, but I'm going to make a couple little changes. So just to run through really quickly what I have going on. There's no amp block in here, as there shouldn't be. This is a template for a preset to get us set to be able to kind of use it universally to add our own amp block and cab block or IR block, whatever your sound you're creating, and then run it through this kind of template that would get you kind of hopefully 85–90% of where you want to be for a finished product, a nice polished finished tone. So we do have a couple blocks left over. Now that we have 8 blocks in the Stomp, it's really wonderful. We can add some of these bells and whistles that I really enjoy from the full Helix. And before, with only the 6 block limitation, we really had to cut some corners. We're still going to cut a little bit though, just to free up a few other blocks. So what I'm starting with is, as normal, my high and low shelf. So as I mentioned yesterday, the low frequency and high frequency settings as my starting point are 650 Hertz on the frequency of both of those. I cut all the frequencies below 650 Hertz by 2 dB, and I boost all the frequencies above that by 2 dB. Now, could that change once I get dialing in a particular tone? Absolutely, but those I find are good starting point settings. I also have my trusty old transistor tape, feedback at 22%, mix at 26%, spread at 2.3. I turn that on when I need it. When I don't, it's off, right? I'm a real sucker for delay and reverb on almost everything I do. Not, a ton of it, but just it helps to, to sit in the mix and just sound more natural and smooth. So I really enjoy that. So we come over to the dynamic hall block. Now, here's the problem that we're going to run into with the Stomp. And this might be disappointing for some Stomp users. In the Helix, I am using 2 paths, right? And as we know, each path sort of has a processor dedicated to it. So I put all of these template blocks on the second path using one processor, and then I put my amp and cab blocks on path number 1. The problem here is that with the dynamic hall reverb and with the retro reel at the end, if I come over to my amp and cab block, we lose the ability to use looks like about 85–90% of our amps, which is really going to make this kind of useless and not so great. So what happens if I come over and just change this back out to, let's say, a legacy room reverb? Come back over to our amp and cab block. We get some back, but still not all the amps that we would possibly want. So if I undo that, get my dynamic hall back, again, we see we lose a whole bunch of amps. Now, if I get rid of the retro reel at the end, which is a block I really kind of liked, and I put this in, I'm still missing amps. So as much as I want to give you a template with the retro reel and the dynamic hall reverb, it's not looking very likely or possible on the Stomp, unfortunately. Now, some folks might ask, what about if we get rid of the LA Studio comp and keep the retro reel? It's better, but we still lose the ability to use some amps. So it's kind of sad, but instead of using the dynamic hall, I think I'm going to have to go back to my normal kind of settings here that, and I can't remember exactly, probably somewhere in around there. We can adjust those settings. Go back to a normal room reverb. Again, though, depending on what amps you want to sacrifice, I'm going to just come through here and I'm going to pull the retro reel out as much as I like it, and I'm going to opt to have the LA Studio comp in there. Now what we've done is we've freed up 4 extra blocks, because now we have the 8 blocks, and now if I come in, grab an amp and a cab, I get all my amps and cabs back. And you know, if I pick something like the Placator Dirty, I'm not a big fan of that cabinet with it. I'll go to a 412 greenback 25, throw a 160 ribbon mic on it, pull that back a couple inches, and I don't know, bump a little more presence into this. That's kind of what I would unfortunately have to do with the template for the Stomp. If by some chance you want to grab the Helix version I put out yesterday and load it in, it will load into your Stomp, but you're going to be extremely limited on the amps that you can use, unfortunately. So we do have a bit of processing power issue here as far as trying to utilize all those blocks. Having said that, let's take a listen and hear what, whoops, let's turn that back off, what these blocks sound like. So here it is, just with the amp up, and I'm just going to crank the channel volume a bit here, just with the amp thrown in with these settings. All right, if I bring my high and low shelf in, set off. You'll notice that that high and low shelf just kind of opens up the sound a bit and makes it work a little bit better. If I bring that reverb in, I might even bring that up. I'm really not trying to add anything major to it here. Just more get away from the inherent dryness of a direct recorded guitar. And you can make the adjustments to that you need. And then finally, I'll bring in my LA Studio Comp. You can kind of hear it just adds a little bit of that glue to it. So again, if we go and bypass all of these effects, we have this sound. When we bring them back in, and that's what we have to the tone. Kind of sad that we can't add in as many of the new features as I wanted. The dynamic hall and the retro reel are using up a fair amount of processing, and therefore we kind of have to cut back on them. Let's examine one other possibility though. This is a stereo preset. These are all stereo blocks. Let's see what happens if we turn them all into mono blocks. Okay, so what I've done now is I've turned these all into mono blocks with the same or extremely similar settings back to what I could remember. So a mono low and high shelf, a mono transistor tape with similar settings, a mono dynamic hall reverb, an LA Studio Comp in mono, and look, I've added the retro reel in, and I'm gonna set it to the settings that I kind of really liked when I had it in the other template. Now let's see what we can add amp and cab wise. Well, look at that. We have all of our amps and cabs back. So it's not a total loss. We can have a mono template. Let's just add in back to what I had going on here a minute ago. I believe I was around there. I believe I turned that off, added a dab more presence to it. Okay, so now if we come in and listen to this with all of those blocks turned off, here's what we have. We add in our high and low shelf. We add in our reverb. Nice. We add in our LA Studio comp. And finally, we add in our retro reel. And we can bring in our delay. So let's hear it without any of those blocks on. And with. So it's going to be up to us to decide what we want to do. If we want an all stereo path, we're going to have to limit the use of the retro reel and the dynamic hall. If you don't mind it all being in mono, then there you go. You can pretty much have your pick. Use the retro reel, use the LA Studio comp, the dynamic hall, high shelf, low shelf, delay. All of your amps are available and you'll still have a couple other blocks. So I'm going to have both of these up on custom tone. And I'll have the stereo version, I'll have the mono version, and you guys can choose. You'll now know the difference is with the stereo version, it's going to be very limited. No retro reel, no dynamic hall, unfortunately. With the mono version, we can get all of the new sweetness from the 3.1 firmware update. So those are up on custom tone now. As you view this, go download them, try them out, use them to your heart's content. But remember, these are starting points. You can tweak them however you want, add whatever cab and amp or IR and amp you want in there, tweak everything, make some subtle changes. And I hope that gets you guys moving in the right direction to get a tone that's going to be very usable and workable with minimal work. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get use out of watching it. Subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back real soon with some more. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Ciao for now.